the lesbian love between a billionaire woman and her maid. The morning Sophia Alderton fired her entire household staff, she was standing barefoot on the cold marble floor of her penthouse, still wearing yesterday's clothes. A half-empty bottle of wine on the counter, and tears she refused to let fall burning behind her eyes. She had just turned 42. She had just signed the papers that dissolved her 11-year marriage to a man who had spent a decade pretending to love her while loving her money instead. And she had just realized, standing in that impossibly large and impossibly empty home, that she did not know a single person in the world who loved her for who she actually was. So she sent everyone away. The chef, the driver, the personal assistants, everyone, except the quiet young woman she had barely ever spoken to, who showed up the very next morning with a bucket and a mop, and a soft expression that asked no questions. A 26-year-old maid named Clara Reyes, who had been working in the background of Sophia's life for nearly 2 years without Sophia ever truly seeing her. Clara had grown up in a small apartment in the southern part of the city, the eldest daughter of immigrant parents who had crossed borders with nothing but hope stitched into the lining of their jackets. She had worked since she was 17, waitressing, cleaning offices, babysitting, sending money home every month without complaint, without self-pity, without the luxury of asking what she actually wanted from her own life. She was intelligent in the way that quiet people often are, the kind of intelligence that observes everything and says very little, that understands people better than they understand themselves. When she walked into Sophia's penthouse, that first morning after the mass firing, and found the woman sitting alone at her dining table staring at nothing, Clara simply made tea, placed it beside her without a word, and went about her work. That single act of wordless kindness broke something open in Sophia that she hadn't even known was locked. In the weeks that followed, the two women began to exist in each other's orbit in a way that was slow and careful and utterly unlike anything Sophia had ever experienced. Sophia was used to people who performed for her, people who laughed louder when she was watching, who agreed with everything she said, who angled themselves toward her wealth the way flowers angle toward the sun. Clara did none of that. She moved through the apartment with a quiet efficiency that felt almost meditative, and when she did speak, it was always something real. She pointed out a book she noticed on Sophia's shelf and asked if she had actually read it or just bought it for aesthetics. She mentioned, without embarrassment, that she thought the painting in the living room was placed on the wrong wall, that the light hit it incorrectly. She was the first person in years who spoke to Sophia as though Sophia were simply a person, not an empire. Sophia began to linger in whatever room Clara was working in. She told herself it was because she had nowhere else to be, because the divorce had temporarily paralyzed her professional ambitions, because she was simply lonely. But loneliness alone does not make you notice the exact way someone pushes their hair behind their ear, or the way their laugh sounds surprised even when they're the one who made the joke, or the way their eyes hold something careful and ancient and deeply kind. Sophia noticed all of these things, and the noticing frightened her in a way that nothing in her adult life had managed to frighten her, because Sophia had built her entire identity on being in control, and what she was beginning to feel was entirely, terrifyingly out of her hands. She had never fully allowed herself to examine the parts of herself that had always reached toward women, the quiet recognitions she had, buried under ambition and a conventional marriage and the noise of being someone important. She had spent so many years performing the life that was expected of her that she had almost convinced herself the performance was the truth, almost, but then Clara would look at her, really look at her, the way very few people ever had, and Sophia felt the performance dissolve like paper in rain, and underneath it was just a woman who was tired of pretending and desperately, achingly hungry to be known. The shift between them happened on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Sophia had been on a call with her lawyers for 3 hours, and when it ended, she sat in her study with her head in her hands, overwhelmed by the legal and financial wreckage of a marriage built on dishonesty. Clara appeared in the doorway, not to clean anything, just to check, the way she had quietly begun to do. She saw the state Sophia was in, and she walked over and sat down across from her at the desk, which was not something a maid was supposed to do, and she simply said that whatever it was, Sophia did not have to carry it alone in this moment. And Sophia, who had not cried properly in years, who had perfected the art of composure as both armor and currency, broke down completely. Clara did not look uncomfortable with the tears. She did not try to fix or minimize or redirect. She just stayed, steady and present, the way the ground stays beneath your feet even when everything above it is collapsing. It was in that unraveling that Sophia understood what she felt, and the understanding was enormous and terrifying and, underneath the fear, quietly beautiful. For weeks after that evening, Sophia wrestled with herself, in the way that people do when they are about to step off the edge of everything familiar. She worried about power, about the imbalance between them, about whether it was right to feel this way about someone who worked for her, whether her feelings were fair to Clara or whether they were just another form of taking something from someone who had less leverage to say no. These were not small concerns. They kept her awake. They made her careful, more careful than she had ever been with anyone, because for once she cared more about another person's dignity than about her own desire. What she did not know, what Clara had also been quietly carrying through those same weeks, was that the feelings were not one-sided. Clara had spent years learning to protect herself emotionally, learning not to want things that seemed impossible, learning to treat the distance between herself and a woman like Sophia as something natural and permanent, like the distance between the earth and the stars. But Sophia had kept closing that distance slowly, honestly, without the kind of entitlement that Clara had expected from someone so powerful. Sophia asked her opinions. Sophia remembered what she said from one conversation to the next. Sophia looked at her not as a fixture in the household, but as a fully formed human being whose inner life mattered. And against every wall Clara had built to keep herself safe, she had begun to fall in love. When Sophia finally told her, it was not dramatic in the cinematic way of grand gestures and orchestral music. It was quiet. They were sitting together on the floor of the living room late one evening, surrounded by takeout containers and a documentary neither of them had been fully watching. And Sophia said that she needed Clara to know something, that she understood completely if it changed everything, that she would never want Clara to feel pressured or cornered, but that she could not keep pretending she did not feel what she felt. She said that Clara had made her feel more like herself in 4 months than anyone had in 42 years. She said she was not asking for anything. She just needed the truth to exist between them, because she was done living inside of lies. The silence that followed was long, and then Clara looked at her, and the careful guard that she always kept so precisely in place came down completely, and she said that she had been afraid to want something, this much because wanting had always made her vulnerable, and vulnerable had always meant hurt. But she was tired of being afraid of the one thing in her life that had ever felt completely real. What followed was not a fairy tale in the simple sense of the word. There were complicated conversations about what this meant for Clara's employment, about how to navigate a relationship where the structures of power were so unequal, about what it would mean for both of them publicly and privately. Sophia restructured everything thoughtfully and deliberately, not because she felt guilty, but because she genuinely wanted the relationship to exist on ground that was fair. Clara kept her financial independence, took on a role that suited her actual abilities, and slowly, carefully, built a life alongside Sophia rather than in service of her. The people in Sophia's world had opinions, most of them unkind. There were whispers about manipulation, about naivety, about scandal. Both women absorbed the scrutiny without flinching, because they had already had the harder, more important conversations with each other and found that what was between them was solid enough to stand on. If you have ever felt invisible inside a life that looked perfect from the outside, if you have ever been hungry for someone to see you past all the things you were supposed to be, then you already understand what these two women found in each other. You understand that love, the real kind, is not about the equalizing of bank accounts or social standing or the approval of the world outside. It is about being known. It is about someone staying in the room when you fall apart. It is about the extraordinary courage it takes to say the truest thing you feel to another person and trust that the truth itself is enough. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that love finds us in unexpected places, that visibility is its own form of grace, that kindness is never a small thing, then take a moment to like this video. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to the work of telling stories that matter. Stories that say the things people carry quietly and alone. Sophia and Clara were married 3 years later in a small ceremony with no photographers and no press. Just a handful of people who had earned their place in both of their lives. Sophia wore something simple. Clara wore something borrowed from her mother. A woman who had crossed borders with hope in her jacket and had somehow raised a daughter brave enough to love without apology. Before the story closes, drop a comment below telling me what part of this story touched you most. Was it Clara's quiet courage, Sophia's willingness to be honest even when it frightened her, or simply the idea that love can walk through your front door wearing ordinary clothes and change everything? The morning after the wedding, Sophia woke early the way she always had, and walked barefoot across the floor to make tea, the same thing Clara had done for her on that very first morning. In that first act of wordless kindness that had started everything, she carried 2 cups back to the bedroom and sat beside her sleeping wife in the gray morning light, and she felt, perhaps for the first time in her life, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not performing, not pretending, not alone, just home finally and completely, inside a life that was honest and warm and real, the only kind of life worth living, and the only kind of love worth waiting for.